Morning.
Yeah.
I'm actually impressed with how much coffee I've got down already, believe it or not.
Oh, I've had zero. I'm just running on aspirations at this point.
Uh,
I had to find a secluded room here. Got everybody's asleep, including the dogs above me in various areas of the home.
I uh I was gonna ask you what's the kids like thing they're into right now? Like what's the thing that's getting everybody fired up? Like when they wake up this morning, what's the first thing they're gonna start thinking and talking about?
Oh, they're gonna get on them iPads immediately. I mean, they're gonna be on there. Graham's already on his. He told me I was going to sleep last night at like 9:15, and he said, "When are you getting up?" And I said, "I'm getting up at 6:40 in the morning because I got to do a podcast with Zach." And he's like, "Will you wake me up?" I'm like, "If you shut that thing off right now and go to sleep right now, I'll wake you up." And he said, "Okay." And he turned it off real quick and closed his eyes and went to sleep because he's got a thing with wanting to be the first one up every morning. So I woke him up before I came down here, and he was ecstatic. He's up there on his iPad an hour before everybody else can get on theirs.
I mean,
But we'll take them away about breakfast time,
it's a good strategy.
and then they'll be down here running around building forts and stuff.
It's a good strategy getting up before everybody. And it's kind of the advantage of hunting, I think. It's like you get up and start your day, and you're like, next thing you know, it's noon. You've done a lot of stuff.
He's a morning person,
That's good.
100%.
I think I'm a morning person, like once a week, maybe.
I am most days. It seems like I can, as long as I get my feet on the ground,
Yeah.
I'm good from that point forward.
I
But Greg is
no,
not.
no. Greg's no.
Takes
Greg makes me look
takes
like a
Greg
morning
a,
person 7 out of 7 days.
takes old Greg a good hour to get the blood flow
It's hilarious.
up to the norm.
I don't think I really realized that until we actually started THP. Like, I think like I'd heard you guys talk about it at Midwest Whitetail, but then when we started THP, that's when I really started noticing it. It's pretty funny.
Oh yeah, yeah. You got to bake in some extra time for Greg in the mornings
So he's
because he's a slow
yeah,
roller.
yeah, I mean, he is one of those characters. Ben can be this way too, where it's like you're trying to talk to him, and you can tell their brain's not really even on at all yet. Where I feel like the thing about, like you said, about if your feet are on the ground, it's like I think I'd wake up pretty quickly. But it's like with Greg, it takes him an extra little second. Ben does the same thing, where I think sometimes I annoy Ben first thing in the morning because I'm just like, and he's like, yeah, get out of here. But anyway, so I think, do you want to talk about just late season, like cover in general? Do you want to kind of like cover that, or do you want to get more specific on like snow camo, hide, stuff like that, or what are you thinking?
Oh, I don't know, either one. I think hunting in the snow is what is most interesting to
Mm-hmm.
me. Just watching your South Dakota mule deer hunt and, you guys hunting out there and that stuff. And then thinking back to all the hunts we've had in the last couple years where we've been in snow or blizzards or whatever. It's just interesting to see how much more you can get away with
Mm-hmm.
in that type of stuff. And not many people target hunting in the
Mm-hmm.
snow. Greg's always talked about how he loves hunting in the snow, but we've had a lot of success here recently hunting in the snow on the
Mm-hmm.
ground, wearing snow patterns
Yeah.
like snow camo or solid colors or anything.
Yes.
And it just seems like the things can't see you.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't know if that was the case on your South Dakota hunt or
Nah, it
not.
seemed like
It's
it.
it looked like you were blended in like really well. Like whenever you guys would cut to the wide shot, where you could see the buck and then point to you on the hillside. It's like, man, I bet with the winds blowing and snows blowing, I bet that thing has a hell of a time seeing where you're at.
Yeah, I definitely think that um, it is interesting to see the success just in, like you said, the last several years, where beforehand, you know, a lot of the experiences that I had hunting in the snow when I was younger were a lot of tree stand hunting, and then I felt like the challenge with that was always just finding cover in the tree, where since we've started doing this snow camo thing, it almost feels like you can just become invisible. Like you just put the invisibility cloak on and you're like getting away with way more. I think that your hunt last year with Ted during muzzleloader was real similar with the blowing snow, right? Like if I remember right, a lot of that footage, there's stuff coming across.
We were wearing hunter orange
Hmm.
vests, but we had on full suits of snow camo. And I mean, we walked right up to there's two advantages really. It's like the wind was blowing, the snow was blowing, so the visibility was cut
Hmm.
down and everything's moving. So we crept down into that little bottom we were in, and I just looked up and there's deer standing there feeding in the wide open, 80 yards away.
Hmm.
And we had been crunching and walking fast down through there, and we were in the wide open. And those things never looked at us one time. It's like, Ted, I think we can actually just kind of walk past them. And we just started walking, and they never even looked at us. And it was almost like you said, almost like you had an invisibility cloak on.
Hmm.
Like there's no way we would have got away with this, without snow.
Hmm.
And they were in the edge of some really thick cover where if they had no snow on the ground behind them, we would have probably not been able to see them
Hmm.
without really heavily glassing that. Because Jake killed his doe in that same spot a few days ago, and he said that was the big difference. He's like, we started creeping down in there at daylight, and I could not tell if there was deer on that hillside.
Hmm.
And I was like, dude, I could see every one of
Yeah,
them last year when we were in here because the snow. I mean, I could see them bedded up there in like the thick briars and stuff just because,
they
they had
contrast.
that, yeah, that contrast. But no, I mean, they had no freaking clue we were there.
Hmm.
And that's how we killed that buck that night was we just snuck into that bottom with deer bedded, all around us on that rim, and we went slow, and that thing had no idea. I mean, I shot him as soon as we sat down, pretty much. I mean, sat down, looked over there he was, and then we were in position. He may have been looking down there because we were making noise,
Hmm.
the whole time, but he couldn't tell what we were.
Yeah, the snow camo thing, I think what's interesting about so many different camo patterns on like, you know, days without snow is it's hard to match perfectly the setting. Like you can have, I mean, to have a camo pattern that matches every setting, you'd have to have like an absurd amount of colors to choose from, like
Right.
depending, if you're out in more open country or in timber, and even the difference between timber on a dry day and a rainy day, I think, your color might change a little bit on how dark you want your camo to be. But with snow, it's like you could pretty much like sew a bed sheet into the shape of a shirt, and you'd probably be better off than wearing any sort of camo color just because that camo contrasts so much. But then you put the snow camo on or anything really light color like that, and you just blend right in. It's pretty crazy to see, especially when I remember last year with Nick on the day that big buck came in on us, and my release was frozen. It's one I love to relive. But I remember looking back at Nick and being like I can't see him at all over there, and he had almost no cover. He was really just sitting in like, I don't know, waist to chest high little, I think they were aspen shoots. It really had no structure to them. But because that snow camo is kind of colored that way, actually thought I had a piece of it right here, but I don't. But it has that, little bit of broken color to it, and he just disappeared right into it. And it's almost like having a ghillie suit, but I actually think it's better than a ghillie suit in a grassy situation.
Everything's
Yeah.
white. Everything like you said, if there's no snow on the ground, there's a lot of contrasting colors through the woods, and they can pick you out. They can pick your outline out easier, it feels like. But when there's snow, especially if there's snow like up on the trees and
Hmm.
everything, they can't see you. I think you're better off on the ground in most situations like
Hmm.
that. I mean, if you get up in a big oak tree with snow all up in there and you're wearing your snow camo, I'm sure you're good. But that's kind of the disadvantage of the late season is there's no cover left on the trees because all the leaves have
Yep.
fallen. So all you're dealing with is branches or unless you're in an evergreen tree.
Hmm.
But when I think back to like the waterfowl guys and even talking to Nick about waterfowl hunting a little bit and John Lewis, those guys love hunting geese or ducks in the snow because all you got to do is go out there and put a sheet out and lay underneath it. And they said they'll land right on top of you.
Hmm.
And I've hunted geese and ducks in fields before where if you weren't brushed in well, they're gonna
They're
bust you.
flaring
Like I was just hunting
constantly.
ducks a week ago or a couple weeks ago, and like the hide was the number one thing.
Hmm.
I mean, they were busting us flock after flock after flock coming in. Whereas if you'd have had snow and you're wearing a sheet, they'll land on your head.
Hmm.
I mean, and birds can see. I mean, ducks can see really, really well, just like a turkey or anything else. But yeah, I can think of numerous. Oh, I had to, when I was texting you the other day about this, I was thinking of like the various examples over the years, and it's like, man, they really can't see in that crap.
Hmm.
I mean, I was thinking back even when I was a kid, I killed a buck one time on the ground, an 8 pointer with my bow, and I sat in the tree stand until I got bored, and I got down and I started walking around like right at prime time, and I just walked out into this open field, and there was this buck out there feeding. And he was like 60 yards away, and he didn't never saw me walking up the field edge or nothing. And I knocked an arrow, and I just kind of snuck walked the edge of the woods towards him. I'm like, well, if I can get a little bit closer, I'll shoot this thing. And I got closer and closer and closer and closer, and he never looked at me once. And then I just got down on a knee and drew back and shot him.
Jeez.
And I was like, man, that was just one of those one in a million things. But then I got to thinking, like, everything was covered in snow.
Hmm.
Like if you're hunting in a fresh snow too, you're really
Oh
quiet.
yeah.
If it's, if it crusts over and gets real crunchy, that's a problem. But if you're hunting in fresh snow, man,
Yeah.
I can't hear you.
It's funny you mentioned Greg always talking about being in snow, and I remember my dad always talking about it too. And I think it's so ingrained in me at this point to kind of dislike it from the camera situation, which is not relatable to everybody for sure. But you get so wet. You sit there in a stand and you're trying to keep your muzzle loader and your camera dry. It's like, yeah, it's not an ideal situation. But as like I look back, like you're saying, on all these hunts, it's like, man, it is certainly not my favorite weather. Like, yeah, I'm gonna be honest with you. 50 is a high, maybe about mid 40s is a high. Those are my days that I really like to be out there. But just looking at, what you can get away with, and one thing that is funny about that snow camo that I've been wearing is it's totally just bummed from my dad. Like when I was a kid, he got that. It's like a Cabela's top and bottom. They probably don't even make the thing anymore. I actually don't think they do. I think I looked for it. But anyway, I always thought that thing was so cool. That suit, it was always out in the barn when I was a kid, and I'd go like, look at it, put it on. It's just this piece of gear that was always cool to me. So he let me borrow it. I don't know, a couple seasons ago. I was like, "Hey, you wearing this thing?" And he's like, "Oh, not really." And truthfully, I don't really ever remember him hardly wearing it other than a few, and where I hunted a lot, we didn't have tons of snow. I mean, there's definitely days. Don't get me wrong, it definitely snows in Ohio, but like I feel like there wasn't always snow in the late season, and then a lot of times too, you know, you've if you filled the tag or two, you're just like, yeah, I'm not worried about going in the snow.
Yeah.
And I think
That's
that's,
how I always
yeah,
was. I was like, I never bought the stuff because I'm like, I'm gonna wear this once or twice a
mm-hmm,
year. And I'm not even that, I mean, I'm not even that excited about going hunting in January,
right,
or December. I hunted, just in passing almost. It was like, I'm bored today, so I'm gonna go
yeah,
hunt. It wasn't that serious or anything, but after seeing how effective it is, is the stuff that you got like just the outer
yep.
shell, or is it like a legit coat?
It's a little bit more than some of the other stuff that I have. I have other stuff that way. If somebody's with me and they want to wear it, you know, we always are covered for at least 2 or 3 people. But it's a little bit bulkier, which I kind of like because it is a little extra warmth. But it does fit big, so that way you can fit stuff underneath of it, which I think is also really important. Just having it kind of as like a shell, like you said, is being able to get more clothes underneath of it. But I, it has pants with it, but I've still not worn the pants. Last year, I think I was packing them on my pack when I went in. When Nick and I shot that buck, I'm pretty sure that I had it. He was wearing his pants, and I'm pretty sure I had it on my pack. But I think at the very least having that top shell. And then the other thing that I did last year was, I don't have any of them here, of course. They're in the truck, I think. But I bought a white beanie off Amazon for like $1, or like a 2-pack for $3 or whatever. And then I also bought white build hats. And I think I don't know if I've even worn the white build hat, but just putting that beanie over top of your hat is another, way to kind of break up your outline. Like, for example, if you're set up behind a log, the top of your head just looks like a log with snow on it. And I think
Hmm.
those two pieces are things that I just always put in my bag now. It's like, even as early as October, you never know. You might get some crazy snow, and having that stuff, I think, just really bumps your odds up. And then I think the biggest hurdle that like we were just talking about, like actually wanting to go in the snow, like is sometimes a bit of a struggle. But we've had so many good hunts, like you said, it's worth putting the effort into
Yeah,
it.
after seeing the success at this point, I'm like really looking forward to getting out in it because it's such a situational thing. But man, if you can hit it on the right day, you can get away with so much more.
Hmm.
The ones that me and Ted have are just the outer shell from that
Yep.
gear, like the pants and the jacket. It's just it basically is a zip up sheet that you just put over you. And it just is a size bigger so you can wear all your normal heavy clothes underneath it and then put that on.
Hmm.
But I've been doing the same thing, like it's in my tote with all my other clothes. And I don't know if or when I'm even going to use it on the trip or the hunt, but I'm going to have it in there because if we get the right weather, then that's an advantage, you
Yeah.
know. That's something we can take advantage of on that given day
Hmm.
because and it doesn't have to be just during a blizzard necessarily because that hunt when you and Nick killed that Minnesota buck that was like a bluebird
Yeah.
day, wasn't it?
Yeah. At that point in the day, it was perfectly clear. It was relatively calm. Wind was picking up, and by the end of that day, it was actually wild blizzard conditions. But um, early there, it was perfectly clear. The snow was relatively quiet because the temperature was really, really low. It was like zero, like sitting right at zero. And then we snuck in. It was, like I said, it was relatively quiet. I do remember Nick and I kind of talking about how to, how we were trying to step in the snow to be quiet because it had a little squeak to it. It was almost so cold that it was going squawk, squawk.
Yeah.
But we ended up on that one. The craziest part to me, now this is paired with the decoy, so I had the decoy on my bow. But what was crazy about this is, like, we were moving towards where we had last seen the buck, and the sun was behind, like kind of behind us, but it was relatively high in the sky because that was later morning. I would say around 10 o'clock. If I had to guess, I'd have to like think back a little bit more specific to know for sure. But I want to say that was around 10 o'clock, and we were moving in, and we stopped at like a very temporary setup. Like we had no expectation for that to work. It was really one of those spots where you're hoping that he doesn't come in there, because I didn't think we had enough cover. Same thing, we just had these little whips of like alder around us, and there was not much. I mean, minimal. There was a little bit of cover behind us, but not much. And that buck came out, saw that decoy, and like Nick's sitting off to the right of me because he's filming. So like he's definitely in the open. Like he's completely exposed, at least his head and his right shoulder over my, head and right shoulder. And that buck just came all the way to 15 yards. And again, had the decoy on, so that's like absolutely a factor. But
Yeah, but still, I mean, to get one to come in like that for that amount of time and have it that close, everything's got to be
mhm,
perfect. Everything's got to go right. He can't, and he was starting to get a little head
yeah,
bob to him when you shot,
mhm.
but still, that's so close that it's working
it was,
at that
it was
distance.
so
I
close that I
mean,
was
it's,
still able to pull the shot off with a huge glove, a cut off fingered glove, and a hand warmer in my palm.
yeah.
So, I mean, that's pretty close. But
Ted, before he started working with us, he killed one on the ground in the snow at like 5 yards, a
did
doe.
he?
I remember him sending that video in, and it's a kind of a classic Ted and Zip picture that they have where they're both wearing big hats, and Ted's in his snow camo, and he's got that doe. But I remember watching the video because Ted self-filmed it on a
That's
tripod,
awesome.
like, and he killed this doe like point blank right there with his bow. And then we had several hunts. Like we were back in the man, I think we were back in the museum several years ago, and it was late season hunting on the ground with a bow and just sitting on the ground, um, and saw like a pile of bucks, had a pile of them come right down and come right past.
Yeah,
I think Ted was even the one
I
hunting.
think I remember that.
I can't remember if he was wearing snow camo on that or not, but that was really the eye-opening moment last year was after you and Nick came back from Minnesota and we're talking about like hunting in that snow camo and like, dude, they can't even freaking see you. And then me and Ted Ward out there in that blizzard hunting, and it was like, man, this is like cheating
Yeah.
almost. They can't see a thing.
Mhm.
But you're talking about a deer that's, I mean, they're still dark in color. They're not wearing snow camo,
Yeah.
obviously, but now you are. So you're you're really difficult to see and they're easy to see. And it makes me just think of all the possibilities, especially in hilly country with snow on. It's like you're wearing that snow camo and you're creeping ridges, and then where you can glass all down through those open
Oh
woods,
yeah.
you can just probably spot bedded deer after bedded deer after bedded deer. I remember we were uh, we were on a lake hunting in the snow. Like the water was open, but there was snow on the
Mhm.
slopes, um, especially the north facing. And we were just cruising around, and all you had to do was just sit there on your binos, and you would just see them just dot, dot, dot,
Mhm.
dot, 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 all over those ridges. I mean, they stuck out like a sore thumb in that stuff from hundreds and hundreds of yards away. You couple that with like a light drizzle of snow or
Oh
heavy
yeah.
snow, whatever, and blowing snow, they won't see you. And you could really cover some country and not get busted so long as the snow's quiet.
Mhm.
That's probably the biggest thing.
Mhm.
It's like, man, if you get a melty snow that then freezes and crusts over and it's real calm,
Struggle.
then you might be in
Yeah.
trouble. But
Yeah. I think that the other advantage that I like about snow, and I mean, guys in the Northeast are listening to this, like, yeah, I mean, that's why we wait for it all season, right?
right,
But just fresh sign in general, like not just specifically tracking, but obviously that whole tactic the door gets, really wide open when you get snow. But I love the ability to pick up on that really smoking fresh sign. I mean, it becomes significantly easier to judge sign where, let's say, you're on a timbered ridge and you're looking at a trail going to an oak tree or an oak stand, and you're looking at that trail and you're like, man, I mean, yeah, it's beat down, but like, you know, there's some tracks, but I can't tell if those are 2 days or if they're 10 days since it last rained, long time ago since it's been wet and rained in
that's what
this
I was gonna
area.
say. If it's been really dry and you're hunting late season after leaves fall, it's really hard
Hmm.
in the
Yep.
timber.
I think the ability to just like confirm that, hey, this is today or 2 days ago, 3 days ago, just becomes significantly easier to look at that sign and make a judgment call there. On the other hand, the one thing that I've noticed about late season, this is just a side note and something I always think about this time of the year, um, coming up on the muzzleloader season, is if you have those dry conditions, it seems like the one thing about those trails is in the timber, they'll just get rolled over with the leaf. The leaves just really become like I guess the line becomes easy to see, where I feel like in November it's almost more challenging because you've got those fresh leaves coming down
They just
constantly.
fell like a week or two
Hmm.
ago, and yeah,
Where late
you got to
season,
look for the where they punch down through
yeah.
one here and there, but it's hard to see.
Hmm.
Rubs are easy to see, obviously, but then all those leaves cover up any scrapes
Hmm.
that were in there.
Yep.
And sometimes you can still see an old scrape, but it's hard to know how old it actually is unless you can date back the day when those leaves fell off that
Hmm.
particular tree. So I like any type of precipitation for scouting tracks and
Absolutely.
things like you're saying because you can backdate the latest rain or you can backdate the latest snow and then you can figure out exactly when it. However, I have run into the situation where you go out there like literally immediately after a fresh snow. So say it snows like 9 a.m. through 1 p.m., middle of the day. And then you go on out that afternoon and you're trying to find a place to go. It's like, well, the deer were bedded down about the time that the snow
Yep.
started, and they've probably been bedded for the most part all day. So there's very, very, very few tracks,
Hmm.
fresh tracks. But I mean, you look at a scenario where it snows during the evening and then half the night, and then you're out there the next morning, everything that's laid down is from, that night or that morning.
Hmm.
So, all the tracks and droppings on top or earth scrapes that you're finding is all like super fresh.
Hmm.
I love that, man. And you can cover so much ground looking for that fresh sign because I mean, if it's not there, they weren't there
Right.
obviously last night, and that's what we're always looking for. It's like where are they at right
Yeah.
now? Then you couple that with being able to move with snow camo on and spot deer at a distance. It's like, man, there's a lot of opportunities out there where you could have success if you're just looking for the right scenario. That's why I texted you about this, is because I'm always fascinated by situational
Oh yeah.
tactics. Because
Absolutely.
I mean, there's so many things that as a kid when I was growing up that I would just overlook like
Yep.
that.
Yep. I think,
And I mean, how many days have we hunted in the snow now, and how many bucks have we killed in the last 2 or 3 years? It's like not very many days hunted in the snow and killed a lot of
yeah.
bucks,
Yeah, for
given
sure.
the
The that mule deer that Cole and I just got, like the thing that, you know, there's a couple of factors there that I think made that experience significantly easier than some of the other stalks. Number one, absolutely is the conditions. Like winds blowing, I mean, I wouldn't
Look like hurricane
I
force.
want to say we were getting some gusts at to 50. I mean, if not 60. I don't know. That was absurd. It was just like there's a couple clips in there I left in the video because it's so funny to me. I'm slightly off balance and the wind goes woof and I like about fall over. My coordination, balance isn't always perfect out there, but like still the wind's about blowing you over. That's pushing. And then
Yeah.
the fact that and this is kind of an interesting observation as well, which I've seen it 2 times in the plains like that, where when the wind gets crazy, well, I say 2 times, 2 different seasons, in 2021 and then in 2023. When the wind gets crazy like that, the reaction that the deer have has been super crazy to me. Makes you really think about that wind-based bedding, that wind shift bedding. So the reason that I bring this up is sometimes you have these days where that wind doesn't come until middle of the day. You've got
Hmm.
a front, and a lot of times you can see it in the sky. There'll be that like kind of a wall cloud coming. And in 2021 in December, we had those conditions. And Keith and I were sitting up on a glassing point, and you could see the wind coming across the plains. And we were watching deer comfortably bedded. Wind was kind of coming this way, but the cloud was coming this way. And all of a sudden, that wind hit, and those deer just freaked out. They started running to their best option to bed where they could be out of the wind. And that day, this season then, that we killed the buck, we started watching whitetails, and they were doing that same thing, just bailing out of areas, running full speed, trying to get to a spot where they knew they were covered, but it was kind of taking some time and it really displaced the whole herd, It made deer just
Hmm.
take off running for miles. It was crazy. So that's an observation that has also made me think about timber settings and timber hunts where you could anticipate a bed shift, like planning for that a little bit more. And I've heard people talk about it, but until you see it with your own eyes, it's a little hard to have confidence in, I think, especially if you get wind middle of the day. You're like, oh, why would a deer move, a couple 100 yards in the middle of the day? Well, watching them in the open country certainly helps build confidence because you're like, well, literally every single deer gets up and moves when that wind goes, from one direction to the other. Every deer moves. It's crazy.
Think about just your average morning hunt. It's like you go out there and your average morning hunt, it's pretty calm at daylight. Now this isn't one size fits all. Obviously, the weather changes, but a lot of the morning hunts that I've been on this year, dead calm at daylight. You're just sitting and waiting for like a couple hours as the sun comes up, and it's just lightly fluttering, and then like 2.5, 3 hours after daylight, it starts, those day winds pick up, and all of a sudden it's 10, 15, 18, 20 mile an hour gusts.
Mm-hmm.
And this is about the time when you're thinking about getting down or walking out of the woods or whatever. And this is when most people do get down and get and leave. But we see, well, I mean, if we just counted up the mature buck sightings from the morning hunts alone, I almost guarantee you there is way more of them after 9 o'clock than there is before 9 o'clock, and that goes for any time of the year, not just the
Yeah.
rut.
I'd say
And
like
it's
almost
like
80%.
I would bet it is. I mean, there's not very many of them that are right at first
Mm-hmm.
light. And they're in the just overall deer movement in the mornings. So it's like morning hunts are just kind of they're a drag because in an evening hunt, they're going to move in that last
Mm-hmm.
hour.
It's like
But a
building to
morning
that
hunt,
point.
yes, a morning hunt is like, well, they could move right now or they could move in 2.5 hours. I don't really know. They could basically move anytime between 6 and 11,
Mm-hmm.
and even after that, potentially.
Yeah.
So, but man, when the day winds pick up, it's almost like a switch flips. and the suckers just start zipping around. And I think that this is just my guess. I don't know really what's going on, but you're talking about timber settings. I think what they're doing is they're laid up in a spot. I mean, if it's calm and crunchy, they don't have no a care in the world
Mm-hmm.
because they can see everything, they can hear everything around
Yep.
them. They're laid up right there. Then all of a sudden the wind gusts pick up and they can't hear anymore. And it may be coming from a direction where they don't have the scent advantage that they want. They just start to get a little
Mm-hmm.
nervous. And even if I mean, they'll get up, and if it's blowing hard, like you're saying, they'll run,
Yeah.
and then you'll just see deer like running like crazy, and then you're like, what spooked them? It's like the
Yeah.
wind just did. They're just wigged the hell
Uh-huh.
out. But they also, even when it's not gusting super hard and it just picks up to 12, 15 miles an hour, you see them walking around and
Mm-hmm.
meandering around the woods. And I'm just curious if that's not what they're doing, is if they're bed shifting, and that's why you see that movement. It's very predictable
Yeah.
anymore. We've seen it so many times at this point. I got a lot of confidence in saying that you need to wait for the day winds to
Yeah.
pick up in the morning
Mm-hmm.
before you call it a
Yep.
morning.
I watched a hunt that I think I was just telling Cole about it. It was 2021 season. Jake and I were tag teaming this area with John Lewis and Jake Lynch. They were going to go set up in a tree stand that they had hunted the night before. Jake and I were going to go to the other side of the river and glass. So they were going to be in a setup on an edge, and we were going to glass. So it was almost like we're getting the best of both worlds in this area, because it was also plenty big enough that, like, if there was deer on their side, we weren't going to get to them quickly, and vice versa. So we're sitting there watching this spot, and I don't know, a few hours go by, 2 3 hours, whatever. It gets to be like general quitting time for like a quick morning hunt, 9:30, 10, something like that. John and Jake get out of get out of the tree. We watch them get out. They go up to the truck. They pull away. Well, meanwhile they're driving to service, so that way they can call us, because where they were set up, they didn't have service, but we were up on a glassing point. We had service. Either way, they were going to give us a call. So they pull out of there, and as soon as they pull out of that spot, it is like a parade of bucks walking down that edge right past where they're sitting. It's just like one after another, to the point where it's just like it's like a joke. It's like a bad joke, you know. There are all these. I mean,
Yeah.
certainly they'd have had like a close call at the minimum, right?
Yeah.
So John finally calls me, and he's like, trying to get a midday game plan or whatever, and he's like, well, what do you know? And I'm just like, well, I know that two guys just got out of their stand a little too soon, because bucks just went
Yeah.
rolling past. And I think what's interesting about that is it had to have been some sort of wind change. I don't remember the specifics. I'm sure we could figure it out by watching the footage, in full. But what was the most interesting then is the big buck that they had seen in there the night before, or what we believe that, assuming it was the same buck. We didn't see that buck that day until like noon, and that was an October hunt. Nothing real great about the weather conditions, and all of a sudden, all those bucks got up and moved, and then the biggest one, we didn't see him till like straight up middle of the day. And it was just interesting because, and I want to mention this as well. One of my favorite parts about hunting open country and then turning around hunting timber, especially if it has similar terrain like hills, just hills or mountains. When you hunt one and then the other, they complement, like the things you take away from both complement the other one so much that it's so fun to hunt both, because then you can take that stuff, what you're seeing in the open country, and then put it into the timber. It helps you build confidence, and then again, vice versa. And I just feel like after hunting this open country stuff and then thinking about these old hunts in 2021 as well, it just has me so fired up to just go into timber now and use that reference. Because again, when you're seeing these things, it's just proven to yourself that like, hey, sometimes noon in October is the time to be, catching that buck moving a little bit. And I just think that's, I don't know, cool,
You
cool.
just don't know exactly when. So the most time that you can spend out there is that's the solution. But I hear you when you're talking about changes, like a change in wind speed or a change in wind direction, regardless of what time of the day it is, that can you better be watching.
Mm-hmm.
You better be out there. And even if it's warm, they'll do the same thing. I mean, they're they're moving because it's making them nervous or because they need to do a bed shift, because they're not in an ideal
Mm-hmm.
spot. And also, I think that, we talked to Bronson and Steve from Mississippi State and all their research that what do they have, like 5 feeding bouts a
Yeah,
day?
I think it might even be
I think a deer
might
has
even be 7.
like, I don't know, but it's a bunch of them. And you start thinking about that. It's like, well, the deer's they've got to feed then like every 5 or 6 hours. And they're like, yes, they do.
Mm-hmm.
They have to feed every 5 or 6 hours. I'm like, they don't just go and feed in the evening and then feed all night. And they're like, no, they get up in the evening and they go and
Mm-hmm.
feed and they peruse around or
Yeah.
whatever. And then they bed down again. And then in the middle of the night, they get back up and they go and feed and move around again. And then they bed down again. And then first thing in the morning, they do the same thing. So it makes me think like mature bucks, they're usually getting back oftentimes to their secure area before daylight. They may not be bedded, but they're back real close to a secure
Mm-hmm.
place. And maybe they lay down right at daylight or right before. Well, if what's 5, 6 hours after that, it's the middle of the dang day.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they've got a feeding bout at some point during daylight
Yeah.
hours, and they just don't lay there the whole day. However, 4 or 5 hours is a long time for a guy to sit there and stare at leaves blow, or sit there and glass a hillside with grass in it and see no deer.
Mm-hmm.
But you just don't you we don't really know how many deer are actually out
Right.
there. And I feel like I've made this mistake before where I'll look at an area like that. I'll go on one hunt, sign or no sign. If I don't see anything, I'm gone. And I like to move and chase sign and whatever. But even hunting in Mississippi here these last couple weeks and that really thick crap, it's like you could hunt a thicket where you could see over the whole thing and you could sit there for 5 hours, not see a deer. And you could go right back to that thing that afternoon or that evening, you could see
Yep.
10. They're all there. They're just, you have to be there and catch that movement peak. And I mean, there's all different people that say you can predict it with the moon, or you can predict it. The movement in the morning is predictable, and the movement in the evening is predictable. But man, I I can't tell you how many times we've seen deer up and moving around in the middle of the day at all times of the year based on the wind, just with wind picking up like that. I mean, we had a deer in the buck nest. We were getting set up in mid-October. We were getting set up like 4 or 5 hours before dark, and it was a front day where it had been coming out of the south,
Mm-hmm.
and like at noon, 1 o'clock, from noon to 1:30, it switched from a south wind to a northwest. And like we were waiting for that switch to happen so we could get in there on the south side of the buck
Yep.
nest. And we waited, waited, waited. We waited in the edge of the woods up there. I mean, it's sitting there blowing out of the south, and we're like, well, we're just gonna wait because I don't want to blow this bedding area.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what ended up happening was the dang wind switched, and we moved in there, and we're climbing a stupid tree, and a deer, the biggest buck in that bedding area that we'd seen, that old gnarly thing,
Mm-hmm.
that year that you and I were in there. It may have even been me and you that day. I don't remember if it was me and you or me and Corey, but we were climbing the tree, and it's the middle of the day, and I turned around, and that deer's coming right out of where we just walked at 1 in the afternoon, making a 300-yard shift right into the middle of the nest. Walked right over our ground scent, didn't have a care in the world. I mean, the thing's not rut
Right.
cruising. He's just bed
Yep.
shifting. It's like that wind was a light south all morning waiting on that front. And then boom, the front's here, northwest, 12:30, 1
Yeah.
o'clock, 15 mile an hour. And there he goes. He moved. Probably made a 200 or 300 yard switch and then bedded down. We did not see a deer the rest of the day, even during prime time in the evening. So it's like you think about that day, and you could have hunted that bedding area in the morning. You could have hunted it in the evening, not seen a dang deer. And if you would have been sitting there during the wind shift in the middle of the day at 12, 1 o'clock, who knows how many bucks you would have seen. That's just the only one we saw because we were preoccupied with hanging a damn
Yeah.
set. But um, that's just one of many examples. I mean,
I think
and then we were talking about all the mature bucks in the mid morning during all times of
mhm.
the year. It's like it's pretty predictable at this point.
Yeah.
You've got to just be out
Right,
there.
right. I think it's one of those things. It's hard to read it. I struggle a little bit to like you had mentioned moon, weather, being able to predict those movements. When I'm looking at the forecast, for example, I don't say, all right, then. I mean, sometimes maybe there's more of an obvious shift where it's like, fluttering until, 9:30 and then the wind picks up and kind of switches. Those days are a little bit easier to predict, but I've noticed a lot of times it's just a feel. Like you're just out there and you can hear that wind start to pick up. You start to notice
Yeah.
little cues where other animals and stuff start to move around too. And then all of a sudden, boom, there he is, kind of just cruise, slowly milling around a bedding area or something. I mean, I think of that one Nebraska buck that Jake and I shot. I mean, back in 2017, that whole hunt seemed like a bed shift. Like right when that wind picked up, man, he was up and moving, and it's just become, I would say, something when in the hunt, if you can tell yourself, hey, stick this out a little bit longer when you feel that change. And sometimes those changes can be other conditions as well, like maybe just simply clouds coming over, or the wind is an easy one, but going from clouds or sun to clouds, or clouds to rain, or clouds to snow, those things seem to make little shifts as well. And I just think that playing into the wind based and back, I mean, all the way back to this mule deer thing, just seeing day in and day out on this last hunt where deer were going based off those conditions was really eye-opening for all settings, and something that's just certainly going to help me in other hunts because
Yeah, but whenever you were slipping up there, you had two bucks bust out of there.
yeah.
But they didn't. Did they spook because they saw you, or were they just running
I,
because of the wind,
honestly, Warb, I
like
have
you'd been seeing
I,
that
I have
morning?
no idea. I guess I do have an idea. Maybe I got sloppy and they saw me. I don't think so because I felt like I was really looking, and the conditions being the way they were, the wind blowing the way it was, it seems hard to believe that they spooked because of us. Now, one thing I have noticed is like if you drive past deer, it can put them on edge. So maybe they were just on edge already from us having driven past, because that was kind of a accident. We just happened to be taking the road that was right underneath where they were bedded. So they maybe were on edge, and then the wind freaked them out, or maybe they were on edge and did see us or something. But I watched two bucks run, and I mean, my heart sank because it was just like, dude, like we've spent all this time looking and planning, and here then we're just below it. But then I had just looked back at Cole and told him they're running, and then I looked back, and the other one that we ended up getting is just totally calm. Like
Yeah, he didn't look like he had a
he had
clue.
like no cues that made him look nervous. He never had his ears kind of.
Were they bedded together, or were the two like a little bit further
When we
away?
left them, they were like right beside each other. The two bigger ones were really close to each other, and the other one was maybe 7 yards away from them, tops.
Man, that's crazy to think. Like what? If that's a calm situation or something, they're probably all
Oh,
out of there
yeah. Yeah.
because he hears the other two get up and they're gone. But
And I don't know if it was a deal where, like, maybe, like, for example, if they wigged themselves out on the wind and the snow blowing, then I don't know what about that moment was different. On the other hand, though, if maybe if I popped around there too fast and one or two of them saw me and they just took off running, the other one didn't see anything, he's just like, what are these fools doing? Like, I don't know, they're just wigging themselves
Yeah.
out. I think that alone, like you said, on a calm day, even if they did wig themselves out, the other one's going with, because he's like, yeah, I don't know, I don't trust that either. Where on this day, he's just like, it's just crazy, and we're,
It's crazy. Every deer's
yeah,
running all over
we're
the
all wigged
place.
out. So he
Yeah.
just seemed to be calm, and then he bedded immediately, almost. Like I watched him stand there, and then he bedded right back down. And then the thing that I thought was probably the coolest is, you know me. I was like, I'm not gonna. I say it in the video. It's like I'm not gonna sit here all day. Like we're too far from him. I don't have enough confidence that he's gonna come our way. I got a feeling that he's gonna feed and then drop down. And even if he does that and angles our way, he could still be 40, 45 yards.
60
Yeah.
yards or whatever. Yeah.
So the wind was blasting over the top, and I talked about this in the video as much as I could, but the wind was blasting over the top, northwest, I guess, and that was coming over that bowl, which is basically right at his back. So when we first see him, he's looking down the hill. The wind's like, the predominant wind is technically going straight over him. But really interesting, as we're watching him, and Cole brought up, like, did they wind us? Because there was a couple times you'd feel that wind, it's supposed to be coming this way, would just hit you in the side of the head. And I kept watching the grass in that bowl, and if you watch the video closely, almost the whole time Cole's filming that buck, the snow is going, as the viewer, left to right, going straight back up that bowl. And I remember sitting there in the moment, and, it's brutal. Everything's loud and cold, and Cole and I can barely even talk, because it's so loud. And I remember just thinking, okay, if you were hunting elk or deer in southern Ohio, for example, and you have a south-facing slope with a north wind, you're going to expect up at the top to have some sort of, like, wind clash, some sort of roll over the top. And there's been a couple setups that, like, Keith and I had in the deer woods in timber settings where that's what we were playing, and we were just kind of guessing that going in, and it would work, and it would just sail off the top. And I remember thinking, if I just risk it and try to get above him with the wind blowing the way it is, with this snow camo on, and the fact that he eventually stood up and started feeding, I was like, I might just be able to move it pretty quick, use the wind that's blasting over the top as noise cover, and then, hopefully just shoot it out over the top. So I ended up making that move, obviously, got up and around, got eyes on him again, and those conditions allowed me to do things that I've never done on those mule deer like that. Like, I just moved it pretty quick throughout that whole stalk. And then once I got there, it was weird. There was a really weird feel there. I think part of it is he's on his feet feeding, and you could just tell his eyes were distracted. But dude,
Yeah, he doesn't ever look at you once.
literally never
like.
one time. It was kind of crazy. But there was this weird feeling because
Yeah, after having so many stalks where it's like, you just so much as bring the cam up and
yeah, dude, that's
they're just like,
that's
whoa.
that's exactly what I was gonna say. It's like there's been so many where I'm watching like a time through the grass, and I'm like so paranoid. I'm wearing that stupid hat because I'm so paranoid. I'm just like doing everything I can to get away with it. Well, here I'm sitting, and I know I'm possibly skylined if he looks at me for too long. But I just put a few yucca plants, barely any cover, between me and him, and I would just sit as low as I could. And I felt like I felt invisible. I was like, there's no way he's going to see me. I just felt so confident in that moment. And, 100%, give that to the conditions, and then, wearing snow camo and just wearing enough that it was going to be really hard to see me up
Yeah,
there.
I mean, I would love to be able to look back at some of the it if you look at the perspective from the deer in all these different scenarios, it's got to be just
hmm
invisible.
I
I mean, because everything's white.
hmm
It's just,
yeah.
yeah,
How do
it's
you pick
crazy to
up on
think too. And
anything like that?
it's just wild to see the contrast of, like you're saying, of all these other stocks. I'm like watching Greg stock those things earlier this year, and it goes for whitetails and mule deer, probably anything honestly, but just watching him slide up to like 25 yards away from that buck when he's bedded underneath that little
hmm
tree, it's like there's no way that that thing. I mean, he sits there forever, and that thing eventually just
Yeah.
gone, and there's very little
Oh
movement.
yeah. They're
But
they're
with that deer, like you said, like he's standing up and he's walking around in circles, and in the footage, he's just looking around. He has no freaking idea. He's got not a care in the freaking
it was a
world.
pretty surreal feeling, truthfully, like having been, so paranoid, had built like this paranoid mentality because of how, many times we've been busted on these types of stalks. And a lot of it comes down to lack of cover. Like, I think one thing that I mentioned at the end of that video that I kind of wished I would have worded slightly differently was whitetails are more likely to jump from their bed, or less likely to jump from their bed. I don't necessarily mean that 100% of the time. I wish I would have worded this just slightly differently. I think that whitetails can be just as likely to jump from their bed, but those mule deer in those really open situations are very good at putting everything to their advantage to where they hear one little thing and they're like, what's the point of me staying here versus running right over there and then just making that move and knowing I'm safe. Where I feel like whitetail,
Hmm.
they get in that pocket where they feel really safe and
They're very hard to move
yeah,
sometimes,
like they'll hold
especially
tight.
if it's really
Yeah,
thick.
yeah.
Yeah. It's like in down there where we were hunting in those thickets down
hmm
south, you'd had to step
Yeah.
on them, the big ones especially.
hmm
It's like if you went in the edge of one of those thickets and it was calm and you cracked, you would maybe get some deer up close by, but they were bedded in basically a sea of head high grass and
hmm
cattails for, it might be 100 acres of it.
Yeah.
And you don't know where they're at out there. They could be anywhere out in it. So at first we were too conservative setting up on the edge of it next to those open woods. But by the end of the hunt, we were just like, no, we don't know where they're at. They could be anywhere out there. So our best odds is just to go to the middle.
hmm
Like if we spook one, we spook
Yes.
one. And what we found was that we rarely spooked
Yeah.
one. It's
That's
like we would go right to the middle, even on the really calm, crunchy conditions. We'd go right to the middle and get up where we could see down in there, and then all of a sudden we'd see deer start popping up,
mhm.
all around us. But to your point about the whitetail bucks, and especially the big bucks, I feel like I don't know if mule deer roam as much or if they have like a wider home range,
Seems
but
like
a
they
lot of
do.
times with a whitetail, especially as they get older, they find them a few pockets on the landscape where they feel safe, where they're not around people.
hmm
And especially if you're dealing with heavily pressured deer, it's like usually if there's a really big one there, he's on a heavily pressured spot, he's gonna find, a couple spots that don't have people in it. He's not gonna find like a whole slew of them.
hmm
Like you look at any public area, and there's people pretty well all over most of
Yeah.
it, but there may be just like a little hole here, a little hole here, and that thing don't want to leave it. You gotta kick him up like a rabbit to get him out.
Yeah.
A lot of the times.
Yeah. The a couple other hunts that I real quickly, we don't have to harp on them, would like to bring up that were interesting to me was last year I was in New York with Keith and we were attempting to track, but we ended up working up this finger and ended up having a fawn come flying past us, just goofing, kind of seemed like. But we backtracked her, And when we were backtracking her, we eventually ran right into all this sign that was super fresh. So that was a huge confidence boost. The snow had come in heavy the day before. You could tell that this was all since then. All of a sudden, then we look up and there was a group of does feeding kind of up out of their beds, and maybe they heard us coming and kind of got up. It's hard to say for sure. Or maybe they were just up feeding and we timed it right, but they ended up working past us just slightly uphill. Same deal though. Keith and I have snow camo on, orange vests, but snow camo. And man, those deer walked 20, 25 yards right past us broadside. Could have shot him with a bow. Like, easily had a bow shot at him. And I remember that being a real eye-opener for the snow, as well as working at their elevation. Like, that's something that, you know, between the...
Especially the group of does.
Mm-hmm. You can just...
It's like, man, if you can get by with that with a group of mature does, they're not seeing
Yeah.
you.
It was weird. They were looking
That,
at, they'd be looking at us, and they never spooked until they got our wind, which you could predict where
yeah,
that was going to happen. But we kind of had a wind
sure.
going like this, and they eventually smelled us. But then the other one that is not my hunt, but do you ever see where Alex Comstock shot a buck late season? I don't know if he's done it multiple times, but at least one time he shot a buck where he made just a straight up snow blind in the middle of an open cut cornfield. Have you ever seen that?
That sounds
It's
sweet.
really sweet.
Has he got it on his
I think he
channel?
does.
I need to watch that.
So he was seeing bucks go out into a field, and it's like the most open setting you could imagine, which, I mean, you're going to find that in any states that you have, some sort of agriculture. But he just built this snow blind out in the middle, like kind of just made like a snow fort, and sat down in it. And I think he has snow camo on too. And they just like shoots one with a bow doing that. It's like real
Jeez.
sweet.
Sam's killed a bunch of them in the bow
Hmm.
with a bow in South and North Dakota the last few years.
In snow.
Like, yeah, it seems like he's killed like a handful of bucks in the last 5 years up there, and every single one of them's in the snow.
Hmm.
Now I know they have consistent snow up
Right.
there for longer periods of time, but sure seems like he's killing a lot of them in late November and December up there in snow.
Yep. Yep. And I just think that, it's not, I mean, obviously, if you're listening to this, maybe you're just not listening to this or watching this if you're in
Yeah, maybe if you're
Louisiana.
from Florida, you don't care at all about this.
but it is I don't know, it's just for a lot of us it's something that, like we've talked about before, the conditions are so situational that it's like, maybe it's only 3 times a whole season, or one time even, or none some seasons, but just taking advantage of those conditions when you get them is extremely important. And I think that it's just something that we're always getting a little bit better at. And it's easier to go when you don't like the conditions if you have confidence. And I feel like we're just certainly building some experience, a list of experiences that have certainly helped my confidence with going in the snow, and like has got me fired up about late season hunting in general. Like probably similar to you, and like why you brought up this topic is when I was younger, I thought, well, I'm only ever going to gun hunt in the late season, and I don't really even like late season. The only advantage is you get to use a gun. And now I'm leaning, not saying that's changed all that much, but I'm more likely to be excited about bow hunting even in the late season, just because the confidence with those different conditions has gone up so much that I feel like, hey, like we might be able to shoot some bucks with bows even into January if you get those right conditions. And I don't know, that just is something that's kind of new to me, is being excited about late season hunting in general, but specifically bow hunting. I'm like, maybe there's more opportunity there than what I originally thought.
Yeah, I would have never even bought the camo. Like I'd have never even had
No.
it because, like I told you, I don't want to buy something I'm never going to use or it's just going to sit there. But after seeing the results of it, it's like 100% gonna have it in the box at all times now. And I'm even to the point where I'm looking at the weather forecast in like different areas of the state. And if there's an area that's getting snow, I would rather hunt there this time of the year than I would elsewhere.
Yeah. I
Just because I'm so intrigued by it. It's like, man, we've hunted in the snow like 10, 12 times in the last 6 years and we've killed a handful of bucks. It's like that's
yeah.
pretty good odds compared to me hunting. I've hunted like 40 sometimes. It took me 40 hunts this year before I killed a buck.
It's just the way it goes
It's
sometimes.
like anything that gives you a little bit of an advantage your direction.
Hmm.
But yeah, if you don't learn anything else from this whole podcast, you need to try snow
Yeah.
camo
Yes.
in the snow
Seriously, it's
because
and not even you don't even, I don't even really think you have to buy it if you don't want to. I mean, buy an oversized long sleeve shirt or even a t-shirt or
buy a buy a dang bed
yeah.
sheet and cut the arms out of it if you want. I mean, whatever. It's white out there when it snows and they can't see
You
you.
might even be able to
They
make a
can't.
blind just out of a sheet, like if you
Yep.
want, if you don't want to make camo or the actual wear the camo, you might just be able to make a little ground blind out of a.
Take a white painter suit, buy one of those for
Hmm.
$10 at the hardware store and walk around out there in a big white onesie. You look like a moron, but it might work really well. Ted and Zip always call it wearing their
Yeah.
whites.
I mean,
It's like
yeah, but
anything that you can use to your advantage to help you. I mean, it seems like little small tweaks here and there, but you'd be surprised.
I mean, because
You'd
we've
be
been
surprised.
surprised.
That's what maybe makes yeah, that's maybe especially when you're bow hunting, that's what makes the difference in, like you said, having those does walk right by you and maybe having those does stop at 40 yards and go to stomping and
Right.
blowing. That's a lot of times when you're bow hunting, that's what I feel like on so many bow hunts throughout the year. That's ultimately what gets
Yeah.
you is does come out first or a little buck comes out first and they bust you somehow, some way.
Hmm.
And that pretty well derails the rest of
Yeah.
your hunt
They throw a
because
fit.
the big boy has got less odds of just walking out dumb right past you unless it's in the middle of the rut or
Hmm.
something.
Yep.
But man, if you're concealed and you're getting deer coming by you in bow range when they can't see you, you need to take advantage of those conditions
Totally.
when you got them, regardless of what time of year it
Hmm.
is.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good. It's just a good way to, I think, wrap it all up because not it's not going to look the same. I mean, we kind of focused on a couple of things like snow camo or conditions, and then wind shift. And I just feel like the other thing to take away from this is every single day, and then more specifically, the more we hunt, every single hour, there's these little decisions to be made or instincts to kind of go off of, and just continuing to learn that is something that's fascinating to us and just fun, and certainly has increased our, at the very least, confidence in a lot of
It's increased the
situations.
amount of fun that I have out
Hmm.
there. Because, like, I used to not go on really hot, windy
Yeah.
days because it's hot and it's nasty.
Hmm.
But I like look forward to those days now
Hmm.
because I'm like, oh, this is going to be a killer scouting
Yeah.
day where it's like, it's going to be warm, but wind's going to be blowing 25 miles an hour. It's not going to be miserable in the timber. Like, I can work some timber on these days
Hmm.
into the wind, and I'm like plotting my routes 2 days before it gets there and it's a crap movement day
Yeah. Right.
for the most part. But I mean, that's when you learn a lot about these spots in these areas. So yeah, I mean, there's so many we beat it to death,
Yeah.
but there's so many different
Well, and I think
opportunities that you have to get out and to use conditions to your advantage if you're aware of what you can do in those conditions.
that what you just said though is something that has. This is what is the part that I think of that makes it more fun is back when I only hunted one way in one place. When I was younger, I spent so much time at my grandpa's, for example, and I was waiting for a good movement day. So like if I had,
You were deer casting.
yeah, I mean, in it really was, you're like
And
waiting.
the thing does work. Like it says that on the good movement days, it
Absolutely.
definitely lets you know when those are gonna happen. And that's
Absolutely.
usually right. But
But
that doesn't mean you don't need to be out there the rest of those
right, I
days.
just think like it made it a new. You're constantly thinking about where deer might be, and then how close do I need to get. I mean, it just adds these fun. I mean, it's easy to overthink it too, which I know you and I both do that a lot. But it's something that also, when you have the conditions and the confidence to make these decisions easier, it just makes the whole process more fun, and it makes you not have to wait for a specific day. Like, I think about how silly it was that, I had 2 days to hunt in college, for example, and I was just hoping all week. I'd be looking at the weather, hoping that those 2 days, you look at what, a 12-day time span, and in the middle of that,
You
I
got
got 2 days to hunt.
two great cold front day opportunities or
Yeah,
whatever.
like what are the odds that the
Yeah.
weather's gonna fall on those 2 days? Like, oh, like low.
Yeah.
So I just think how much more efficient you can become when you pick up on these things. And not saying that we nail it by any means, but again, just that confidence boost is always a good thing. And any way you can get that is going to be helpful. So, yeah, maybe that's
Yep.
hopefully something else you could take away from this, even if you're in Florida or Louisiana.
Yep.
All right.
I got little kids running around above
Yeah.
me.
Well,
Things are about to get real around here.
Well, yes, it is Christmas Eve for those watching or listening. Warb and I got up early to rip this rip this out. So I think it was a good one and a fun one, and you better get to wrangling kids.
Yep. Happy Christmas, y'all.
Yes.
Yeah. All
All
right.
right.
Sounds good.
Thanks, dude. Thanks everybody for watching and
Yeah, brother.
listening, and catch you later.
See y'all.